Good afternoon. We're on day 142 and we're continuing to look at the statutes and laws of old Israel. And today we come to the last of our excerpts from the book of Deuteronomy that contain laws relating to human behavior towards other humans. Today we're looking at Deuteronomy chapter 25, verses 5 to 10. I'll turn you around so you can see the text. Consider the case of two brothers living on the same property, and one of them dies without issue. His widow is not allowed to marry anyone outside the family. It is his brother's duty to marry her, and the first son of that union will legally be the dead man's heir, and his family tree will continue in Israel. What then happens if the dead man's brother doesn't want to marry her? She should appear before the civic leaders and tell them that her brother-in-law is refusing to do his duty by refusing to give her deceased husband an heir amongst the Israelites. The civic leaders must then summon him to the meeting and remind him of his duty. If he still refuses to marry her, she is then entitled in front of everyone to pull off one of his sandals, spit in his face and say, "This is what you deserve for refusing to give your brother an heir." And everyone will talk about his family as the family of that man who had his sandal pulled off. Henry VIII's divorce case that led to the Anglican Church's first split with Rome was a complicated matter. Scholars on his side argued from a different text, a single verse from Leviticus chapter 20 verse 21 that reads, "If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be barren." The Hebrew word for barren is actually the word stripped. I'm sure the Pope's scholars and Catherine of Aragon's lawyers on their side also were aware of today's passage, which, if it applies to Henry at all, would appear to have obliged him to marry Catherine, his brother's widow, and then exert himself as best he could to provide her with a son and heir for his dead brother. But in truth, neither the passage in Deuteronomy nor the single verse from Leviticus could logically be used to justify Henry's divorce or his split with Rome. There were other issues at stake at the time, such as the burgeoning Reformation on the continent and the problem about who would inherit the throne if Henry couldn't manage to sire a male heir. These ancient rules no longer applied in Christian times. The Leviticus verse stands alone amongst a number of taboos against pagan practices and was probably originally meant to prohibit brothers sharing a wife, and not at all a curse on a brother taking care of his dead brother's widow, but more likely an attempt at saying no good will come of brothers sharing a woman in the end. As for what might be positive in the verses of today's passage from Deuteronomy, they do provide a possible way to keep a dead brother's widow provided for, and his name and inheritance alive. This passing on of a childless widow to another family member, often termed a levirate marriage, is not unusual in human society. It is a survival ploy that has been observed in primitive tribal cultures all over the world and in other places as well. So today, day 142, we have come to the end of our examples of laws concerning how humans relate to one another. For the next 10 days, we will now look at the statutes and laws of old Israel concerning how humans should behave towards God, including during worship. And tomorrow we begin with that famous law observed by Jews and Muslims against making graven images to worship. And I'll see you then.